Hi folks, last thing that we need to talk about for this week is going to be Animate.css. Animate.css is a really popular and easy to use animation library. It's very easy to use, very easy to hook up, very easy to understand, and it can very quickly make your sites feel more professional, more polished, more interactive, or reactive. So let's talk about how to hook it up. I'm just going to go ahead and Google animate.css. And the very first link to pop up is this GitHub repository that links to animate.css. Okay, this is daneden.github.io/animate.css. You don't need to remember that. You can just Google it and it will lead you right to it. But this is actually somebody's GitHub repository. Somebody made this, posted it or pushed it to a GitHub repository, and now it serves as an animation library that people use all over the world. Okay, and here they're called Just Add Water CSS Animations. At this page, there's this drop down where you can see all the different animations which Animate.css supports. And if I click on any one of these, it will show me exactly what it does. It will show me how it animates. Okay, so we'll talk about how to use and how to execute these animations in a minute. But first what we need to do is click here on download animate.css. So I click on that, and it takes me to this page. I see a lot of students get here and then send me help requests. They ask, it looks like something's gone wrong, or a file didn't download. I can't tell what's going on. If you end up here and are confused, I want you to take a moment and actually look at what you're seeing. There's a lot of confusing stuff here. There's this @WebKit keyframe, stuff that you've definitely never seen before. But look at the syntax. Like this, dot, rotate in, curly brace, some code, closing curly brace. What does that look like to you? Hopefully, you should be able to recognize it as CSS. That's literally all that we're looking at. It's complicated CSS, sure, but it's just CSS. It doesn't need to scare you. It's nothing foreign. So if you've ended up here and you think that something went wrong or you can't figure out how to find the file, you are looking at the file. Furthermore, if you look into the URL, that URL ends with animate.css. This is the actual CSS file that we need. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click in the page, select Save As, and in my project folder, I'm going to go into my CSS folder, and right next to main.css, I'm going to save it. File name says Animate. Save as type says Cascading Style Sheet Document, so it's going to be a CSS document, and I click Save. Now, in the file tree of my project, I can see animate.css in my CSS folder. So the only thing left to do is to link it to my index.html just like we do with main.css. In fact, I'm just going to copy this link tag. I'm going to insert it above my main.css link. Label it with a little comment. Paste. And all I need to do is change the file name from main to animate. And we're done. It's hooked up. It's ready to go. The reason why I save it above my main.css is, again, because cascading style sheets, they cascade. The code which occurs further down has higher precedence, and this applies even to the order in which your style sheets load. So I've actually got 3 style sheets here. I've got a font awesome style sheet. This is a really complicated one because it's a CDN, but don't worry about that. There's an animate CSS style sheet, and finally a main.css style sheet. Main.css will always be at the bottom because I want my custom written CSS to be able to override anything else if it has to. So main.css will always be the last style sheet to load, the most powerful one. Okay, so I'm going to close this. Now we have Animate attached to our project. So let's go ahead and load an image. So I've loaded an image. This is an image of the tick from the 90s cartoon. And I want this image to be animated when my page loads. I want it to fade in. Fade in. First of all, let's see if that's an animation that animate.css supports. I'm going to go back to my page. Let's see, can I find a fade in animation? Here's one, fade in. Okay, or fade in right. Something like that. So that will work. This is one way to check to see if an animation is supported. Another way is to simply open up animate.css, hit Control or Command if you're on a Mac, Control F or Command F, and I'm going to look for something called fade. There's fade in, and as I hit the Enter key, it will show me everywhere where fade occurs. There's fade in down big, fade in left, etc., etc., etc. So you can feel free to look in the actual animate.css style sheet to see what animations it supports. Apparently it supports one called Jello. That's an animation. Okay? Anyway, to make this image fade, I'm going to give my image element a class attribute. And in this class attribute, I'm going to give it two classes. The first class is animated. All right, to use an animate.css animation, we need to give the element we want to animate the class of animated. Every time, anytime you want to use animate.css, give the element you're animating the class of animated. And the second class I'm going to give it is the name of the animation as it appears in the style sheet or as it appears on the animate.css website. They're always camel cased, so that's something to know. Fade in. Okay, that's two classes. One class of animated, one class of fade in, or the name of the animation. I save, and now when I reload my page, the tick fades in. Let's try something like fade in left. Well, now he fades in from the left. Now let's try bounce in left. So he bounces in from the left, okay? It's as easy as that. It's as easy as that. As soon as the page loads, any CSS animations are going to render right away. So it's a really neat way, no pun intended, it's a really neat way of animating and making more interesting a user's first impression of your site. All of your elements can bounce in, fade in, slide in. You can also use them in other ways, and once we learn JavaScript, you might want to start thinking about how to trigger some of these animations under very controlled circumstances. Like when a user clicks a button, maybe something on the page bounces or slides out and disappears. So there are a lot of possibilities for Animate CSS, but this is how easy it is to use. Last thing I want to tell you about it is let's just change this animation to just bounce. So it's not going to bounce in, it's not going to bounce out, just bounce. Reload my page, the image bounces, and then it stops. But if this were, let's make this image really small. Go into main.css. I'm going to give it a width of 150 pixels. Okay, so it's a really small image and it bounces. Make it a little bigger so we can see. Okay, so let's say that this image was maybe our brand, our logo, something like that, and we wanted to draw attention to it when a user visits our site. And we wanted to keep attention on it. So maybe we want it to continue to bounce, to keep bouncing. Right now it only bounces once and then stops whenever I reload. I hit reload, bounces, stops. To make this animation loop and continue indefinitely, I can add a third class, infinite. And now when I reload, the image is just going to bounce forever. Okay, so that's all you need to know about Animate CSS. It is really that easy, and I hope you can find some creative use for it. Try to think outside the box.